Ethan Carter had always trusted the mountains. They didn't lie. They didn't shift when you weren't looking. They didn't whisper things you couldn't explain. They stood exactly where they had stood for thousands of years, solid, ancient, indifferent to the small lives crawling across their slopes. That's why Ethan came here. No noise. No people. No past chasing him through sleepless nights. Just silence. But silence, he would learn, can hide things far worse than noise. That night, the air felt wrong long before the sound began. Ethan noticed it while hiking back to his cabin, boots crunching over gravel that should have echoed through the valley. Instead, every step seemed swallowed. The forest around him was too still. No wind threaded through the trees. No insects chirped. Even the usual distant howl of stray dogs from the lower village had vanished. It was the kind of quiet that made your ears strain, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan stopped walking. Something prickled at the back of his neck. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line behind him. Nothing moved. The shadows stretched long and thin between the trunks, but they stayed where they belonged. "Just your head," he muttered under his breath. Still, he didn't move. That's when he heard it. At first, it was so faint he almost dismissed it, a low, dull vibration, like distant thunder buried deep underground. Not rolling across the sky, but rising up through the earth itself. Ethan frowned. Thunder didn't sound like that. He crouched slightly, listening harder. The sound came again. Longer this time. Deeper. It wasn't sharp or sudden, it dragged, slow and heavy, like something massive shifting under an impossible weight. Ethan's chest tightened. "That's not," he started, but the words died in his throat. Because the ground beneath his boots trembled. Not violently. Not like an earthquake. It was subtle. Controlled. Intentional. His instincts screamed at him to move, to get off the slope, to run back to the cabin, but something else held him there. A strange, creeping curiosity rooted him in place. Carefully, he lowered himself to one knee. The vibration came again. Stronger. This time, he felt it clearly, traveling through the soil, through the rock, into his bones. Ethan hesitated only a second before pressing his palm flat against the mountainside beside him. Cold stone met his skin. For a moment, nothing. Then, thump. Ethan jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. His heart began to race. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, no, no." He forced himself to reach out again. Slower this time. His fingers touched the rock. Then his palm. And he held it there. Waiting. Silence stretched. So long he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. Then it came again. Thump. Clear. Heavy. Rhythmic. Ethan's breath hitched. It wasn't random. It wasn't shifting rock or settling ground. It was a pulse. A heartbeat. His stomach dropped. "That's impossible," he said, louder now, like saying it could force it to be true. The mountain answered him. Thump. Stronger. Closer. Ethan stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing as loose stones slid under his boots. His eyes stayed locked on the slope in front of him. Nothing had changed. The surface looked exactly the same, jagged rock, cracks running through it, patches of moss clinging stubbornly to life. Dead. Still. Normal. But beneath it, another pulse rolled through the ground. Longer this time. And then something new followed. A slow, dragging shift. Not downward. Not collapsing. But expanding. Ethan felt it before he understood it, the faintest rise beneath his feet, as though the mountain itself had drawn in a breath. His chest tightened in response, mirroring it unconsciously. "No," he whispered again. The ground held. For one stretched, unbearable second, the world seemed suspended. Then, it released. A deep, rumbling exhale rolled through the valley. Warm air surged upward from the earth, brushing past Ethan's legs, carrying with it a scent so strange and ancient it made his stomach twist. It wasn't rot. It wasn't earth. It was something older. Something sealed away for far too long. Ethan staggered back another step. Behind him, somewhere deeper in the forest, a branch snapped, not from movement, but from pressure, like the air itself had pushed too hard. He looked up at the ridgeline. And for the first time since he'd arrived in these mountains, he felt fear. Not the kind that comes from getting lost or hearing something in the dark. This was different. This was the kind of fear that comes when something you believed was unchangeable proves you wrong. The kind that tells you the world is not what you thought it was. The kind that whispers, "You are standing on something that should not be alive." Another pulse shook the ground. Stronger than before. Ethan didn't wait this time. He turned and ran toward the cabin, heart pounding in his ears, but even as he fled, one thought clawed its way through his mind. That wasn't the mountain moving. That was something inside it. And whatever it was, it had just taken its first breath. Ethan didn't remember the first stretch of the run. One moment he was on the slope, staring at the mountain as it breathed beneath his feet. The next, he was crashing through the tree line, branches whipping against his arms, loose stones sliding under his boots. His lungs burned, but he didn't slow down. Behind him, the mountain pulsed again. Even at a distance, he felt it, deep and heavy, like the echo of a giant heartbeat chasing him through the dark. "Don't look back," he muttered to himself. So he didn't. The cabin came into view through the trees, its single porch light flickering weakly against the growing grayness of the sky. Ethan had left before sunset, but now the light felt wrong, dim, swallowed, like it was fighting against something thicker than night. And someone was standing on the porch. Ethan slowed just enough to recognize the shape. "Lucas!" he shouted, stumbling out of the tree line. Lucas Hale stepped forward immediately, rifle already in his hands. What the hell happened? Ethan bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. "The mountain," he started, but another pulse cut him off. The ground shuddered beneath them. Not violently. Deliberately. Lucas's expression changed. The skepticism drained from his face, replaced by something tighter. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I felt that." Ethan straightened slowly. "You felt it?" Lucas nodded once, eyes already shifting toward the ridgeline. "About 5 minutes ago. Thought it was an aftershock or something, but," he hesitated. "That didn't feel like any quake I've ever known." Ethan let out a hollow laugh. "Because it's not." Another pulse rolled through. Stronger. The porch boards creaked under their feet. Lucas tightened his grip on the rifle. "Start talking." Ethan shook his head, still trying to make sense of it himself. "I was halfway down the ridge when I heard it. Not from above, from underneath. Like something was moving through the mountain." "Moving how?" Ethan hesitated. He knew how it sounded. "Breathing," he said finally. Lucas stared at him. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the mountain moved. Both men saw it. The ridgeline in the distance, dark against the strange gray sky, shifted upward, just slightly. It was subtle enough that if they hadn't been staring straight at it, they might have missed it. But they didn't miss it. Because it happened again. The entire ridge lifted, slow, controlled, like something immense drawing in air. Lucas took a step back. "No," he said under his breath. Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. Because he could feel it too now, not just through the ground, but in his chest, like the world itself was sinking with something deeper, older. The rise stopped. For a moment, everything held. Then came the exhale. A deep, rolling release thundered down the slope, and a gust of warm air slammed into them. It wasn't a normal wind, it came from below, pushing upward, carrying that same strange, ancient scent Ethan had noticed before. Lucas coughed, turning his face away. "What is that smell?" Ethan swallowed. "I don't know." But it made his skin crawl. It smelled like something that had been sealed away, something that hadn't touched fresh air in a very long time. The trees around the cabin rustled violently for a few seconds, then went still again. Too still. Lucas lowered the rifle slightly, though his hands were still tense. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say something is moving inside the mountain." He glanced at Ethan. "What the hell does that mean?" Ethan let out a shaky breath. "I was hoping you'd tell me." A faint creaking sound echoed from somewhere up the slope. Both men turned instantly. It wasn't loud. But it was wrong. A long, dragging noise, like stone grinding against stone under immense pressure. Lucas raised the rifle again, aiming toward the ridge out of pure instinct. "That's new," he muttered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. A thin line had appeared across the mountainside. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow, but as they watched, it stretched. Slowly, deliberately, it carved its way across the rock face. A crack. Lucas exhaled sharply. "That's not erosion." "No," Ethan said. "Because erosion didn't happen in real time. And it didn't follow a rhythm." The ground pulsed again. Thump. The crack widened. Dust and small rocks tumbled down the slope, not falling naturally, but pushed outward, like something inside was forcing space for itself. Lucas took another step back. "We need to leave." Ethan didn't argue. But he didn't move either. Because he couldn't tear his eyes away. The crack stretched farther, splitting the ridge like a scar opening under pressure. And from deep within it, something darker than shadow shifted. Not falling. Not sliding. Moving. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. You see that, right? Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The mountain pulsed again. Louder. Closer. And this time, it didn't just feel like breathing anymore. It felt like something waking up. The news spread faster than it should have. By the time the second crack split across the mountainside, people were already gathering outside, drawn from their homes by the pulses in that, by the unnatural silence, by something deeper than curiosity. Fear had a way of calling people together. Ethan and Lucas weren't alone on the porch anymore. Lanterns flickered along the dirt road leading into the valley. Doors stood open behind them, abandoned mid-routine. A woman clutched her child tightly against her chest. Two men argued in hushed, frantic voices near a truck that refused to start. Somewhere, a dog whimpered but didn't bark. No one wanted to make noise. It felt wrong to disturb whatever was happening. Ethan stepped down from the porch slowly, eyes still fixed on the mountain. They shouldn't be out here, he muttered. Lucas followed, rifle still in hand. You think staying inside would help? Ethan didn't answer. Another pulse rolled through the. Stronger this time. A few people stumbled. Someone cried out. The mountain answered with a deep, grinding sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, stone dragging against stone, like bones shifting under too much weight. Then a voice cut through the murmurs. Move back. It was calm. Steady. Old. Ethan turned. Daniel Reeves stood near the center of the gathering, unmoving while others shifted nervously around him. His posture was rigid, his eyes locked onto the ridge as though he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. Lucas frowned. What's he doing out here? Ethan didn't reply. He stepped closer instead. Daniel, he called. You seeing this? Daniel didn't look at him. I told them it wasn't just stories, the old man said quietly. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. What stories? Another crack split across the mountain, longer, deeper this time. The crowd gasped as small chunks of rock broke free and tumbled down the slope. Daniel finally spoke again. About the first people who lived here, he said. Before the valley had a name. Before the roads. Before anyone thought to call these mountains dead. Lucas let out a dry laugh. They're not alive, old man. Something's just causing. They were never just mountains, Daniel interrupted. His voice wasn't louder. But it cut through everything. Even the ground seemed to pause between pulses. Ethan stepped closer. Then what are they? Daniel's jaw tightened. Seals. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Unwelcome. Lucas shook his head immediately. Seals for what? Daniel's gaze didn't shift. For what's inside? As if answering him. Thump. The strongest pulse yet slammed through the valley. People cried out as the ground dipped slightly beneath their feet, just enough to make balance uncertain. And then, a sound followed. Low. Deep. Not like the grinding stone. Not like shifting. Something else. Something that didn't belong. Ethan felt it in his chest before he truly heard it, a vibration that carried something almost deliberate. Lucas swallowed. Tell me that's just the rock breaking. Ethan didn't respond. Because he knew it wasn't. The crack along the ridge widened again. This time, it didn't stop. It stretched, splitting the mountainside open like something tearing from the inside out. Darkness pooled within the opening. Not shadow. Something thicker. Something that seemed to swallow what little light remained. Daniel took a slow step forward. No, Ethan said immediately, grabbing his arm. You don't go closer to that. But Daniel gently pulled free. You don't understand, he said. If it's waking up, then it means something changed. Lucas snapped, yeah, no kidding. But Daniel ignored him. His voice dropped even lower. They used to say it only moved when it was disturbed. When something reached too deep. Ethan's stomach tightened. Reached deep into what? Daniel finally turned his head, just enough for Ethan to see the fear in his eyes. The mountain isn't the body, he said. It's the lid. Silence crushed down on the group. Even the crying stopped. Because deep inside that widening crack, something shifted. Clearer this time. Not imagined. Not mistaken. A shape moved behind the darkness. Too large. Too slow. And horribly controlled. Lucas raised his rifle again, though his hands trembled. If something comes out of there. You can't stop it, Daniel said flatly. The ground pulsed again. Closer. Faster. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. Why now? He asked. Why is it waking up now? Daniel didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted briefly, past the ridge, past the forest, toward the far end of the valley. Toward the old excavation site. Abandoned. Sealed years ago after something went wrong. Ethan felt a cold realization creep in. No, he whispered. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Then opened them again. They dug too deep, he said. The mountain responded immediately. A violent crack split the ridge. And from within it came a sound that froze every person where they stood. Not wind. Not stone. Not anything they could explain. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Because it carried something far worse than volume. Meaning. A low, guttural vibration that twisted in the air. And for a brief, horrifying second. It almost sounded like a voice trying to form its first word in centuries. Ethan's heart pounded violently. Lucas whispered, "That's not possible." Daniel didn't look away. "It's not learning to speak," he said quietly. Another pulse shook the valley. Stronger. Sharper. The crack widened once more. And the darkness inside shifted again. "No," Daniel finished. "It's remembering how." No one ran. Not at first. It wasn't bravery that held them there, it was something heavier. Something that locked their legs and tightened around their chests like invisible chains. The kind of fear that didn't scream run. It whispered watch. Ethan felt it pressing down on him as he stood beside Lucas, eyes fixed on the mountain as the crack continued to widen. The ridge no longer looked solid, it looked strained, like a shell pushed beyond its limits. Another pulse slammed through the ground. Thump. Closer. Faster. The rhythm was changing. "It's speeding up," Ethan said, barely realizing he'd spoken. Lucas didn't lower the rifle. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's not good." A deep groan tore through the mountainside. Not from above. From within. The sound of stone under pressure, layers grinding, splitting, shifting as something enormous forced its way forward. The crack stretched wider, jagged edges breaking apart as rocks didn't fall. They were shoved outward. Violently. A shower of debris rained down the slope, bouncing and rolling into the valley below. People finally began to move, some stumbling backward, others turning to run, but most were too slow, too stunned. Because the darkness inside the mountain moved again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Something was there. Ethan's breath caught. It wasn't a shape he could fully understand, just a massive distortion behind layers of shadow and stone. It pressed forward slowly, deliberately, like it was testing the space, measuring the resistance of the world outside. Lucas raised the rifle higher. "If that thing comes out." "You can't shoot a mountain," Ethan snapped. "I'm not aiming at the mountain." Another pulse. Stronger than any before. The ground dipped beneath their feet, just slightly, but enough to make several people fall. A child screamed. Someone shouted for everyone to get back. Daniel didn't move. He stood closer to the front now, his thin frame rigid, his eyes locked onto the widening breach as though he were witnessing something inevitable. Ethan grabbed his arm again. "We need to go, now." Daniel didn't resist this time. But he didn't step back either. "It's too late for that," he said. The crack split wider. And then. It opened. Not fully. Not cleanly. But enough. A section of the mountainside gave way with a deafening crack, collapsing outward in a violent burst of stone and dust. The impact sent a shockwave through the valley, knocking several people off their feet. Ethan staggered, barely catching himself. Lucas braced against the porch railing, cursing under his breath. And from the exposed darkness, something emerged. Not fully. Just enough. Ethan's mind struggled to process it. A surface that wasn't rock, but looked like it had been buried beneath it for centuries. Dark, uneven, ridged in ways that didn't match anything natural. It shifted slowly, grinding against the broken stone around it. Then. It stopped. And something opened. At first, Ethan didn't understand what he was seeing. A faint glow flickered deep within the exposed surface, dim, pulsing, like light struggling through layers of dust and time. Then it sharpened. Focused. Formed. An eye. Massive. Partially obscured by broken rock, but undeniably there. It opened fully. And the entire valley seemed to inhale with it. Ethan couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The eye didn't look human. Didn't look like anything alive should. It was too still. too aware. It blinked once, slow, heavy, like the motion itself required effort after a long, long sleep. People screamed. Now they ran. The spell broke instantly. Panic ripped through the crowd as bodies collided, voices rose, and footsteps pounded against dirt and stone. Someone fell. Someone else tripped over them. A lantern dropped and shattered, plunging part of the road into darkness. Lucas fired a shot. The crack of the rifle echoed sharply through the chaos. The bullet struck the exposed surface near the eye. And did nothing. No reaction. No damage. Not even a flinch. Lucas lowered the rifle slowly. "That's not good," he whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Because the eye moved. It shifted within the darkness, tracking the movement below, not randomly, not blindly, but with precise, terrifying intent. It wasn't just seeing. It was observing. Choosing. And then, it stopped. Locked onto a single point. Ethan felt a cold wave crash through his chest. Because he knew exactly where it was looking. At them. Lucas swallowed hard. "Don't move." Ethan almost laughed at that. As if they had a choice. Another pulse surged through the ground. Faster now. More urgent. The rhythm had changed completely. This wasn't slow breathing anymore. This was something else. Something waking fully. The eye narrowed slightly. And for a brief second, the ground went completely still. No pulse. No sound. No movement. Just silence. Absolute. Crushing. Then, the mountain inhaled. Not subtly. Not slowly. Deep. Violent. The lifted beneath them as if drawn upward. Trees bent inward toward the breach. Loose debris skidded across the ground, dragged toward the opening by an invisible force. Ethan grabbed Lucas instinctively. "We have to move, now." But even as he said it, he knew. They weren't dealing with something that had just woken up. They were standing in front of something that had been waiting. And now, it was finally looking back. The pull came first. Not the sound. Not the impact. The pull. It started as a pressure in Ethan's chest, tight, unnatural, like the air had thickened and was being dragged away from him. His breath hitched, lungs refusing to fill as the world tilted slightly toward the mountain. "Lucas," he gasped. But the name barely left his lips. Because they moved. Not trembling. Not shaking. Lifting. The soil beneath their feet rose just enough to break balance. Small stones skittered across the ground, not rolling randomly, but sliding in a single direction. Toward the breach. Toward that eye. Trees bent inward, their branches stretching unnaturally as leaves tore free and spiraled into the air. Dust lifted from them in thin streams, drawn upward like smoke reversing itself. The mountain was inhaling. Deep. Hungry. Ethan felt his body lean forward despite himself. His boots dragged across the dirt, pulled inch by inch toward the opening. "Move!" Lucas shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and yanking him backward. They stumbled, fighting against the invisible force. Around them, others weren't as lucky. A man near the road screamed as he lost his footing, sliding forward on his back, fingers clawing desperately at the ground. Another grabbed him, trying to hold him in place, but the pull was too strong. Both were dragged several feet before managing to catch onto a buried root. "Hold on," someone yelled. But the wind swallowed the words. Except it wasn't wind. It was breath. The eye within the mountain remained fixed, wide, unblinking, drinking in everything before it. Ethan dug his heels into the dirt. "This isn't just air," he forced out. "It's pulling everything." Lucas gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I noticed." The pull intensified. Stronger. Sharper. Pain lanced through Ethan's chest as his lungs fought against the pressure. His ears rang. His vision blurred at the edges. Then, it stopped. Instantly. No warning. No gradual release. Just nothing. The force vanished. The world snapped back into place. For one single second. Everything was still. Perfectly still. Ethan staggered, sucking in air that rushed back into his lungs too fast, too sharp. Around him, people collapsed where they stood, gasping, coughing, crying. What just happened?" someone choked out. No one answered. Because they all felt it. The pause. The silence between breaths. Ethan's heart pounded violently as he stared at the mountain. "No," he whispered. Lucas looked at him. "What?" Ethan's voice dropped, hollow. "That was just the inhale." Lucas's face went pale. The mountain exhaled. It didn't build. Didn't rumble. It detonated. A shockwave of heat and force erupted from the breach, slamming into the valley like a physical wall. The blast threw Ethan off his feet, sending him crashing hard into the ground as the air itself roared past him. Windows shattered instantly. Wood splintered. Trees snapped like brittle sticks under the pressure. The sound was unbearable, not a single noise, but a layered roar of wind, stone, and something deeper beneath it. Something alive. Ethan hit that hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. For a moment, all he could hear was ringing. Then the screams returned. Louder. Panicked. Everywhere. He pushed himself up, disoriented, ears still ringing as dust and debris rained down around him. "Lucas," he shouted. A figure moved through the haze, coughing violently. "I'm here." Lucas staggered toward him, blood trickling from a cut along his forehead. What the hell was that? Ethan didn't answer. Because he heard it. Beneath the chaos. Beneath the screams and the collapsing wood and the snapping trees. A sound. Low. Resonant. Clear. Not random. Not noise. A voice. It didn't echo through the air. It moved through the ground. Through their bones. Through their minds. Ethan froze. Lucas stopped mid-step. All around them, people went still again, not by choice, but because something in that sound rooted them in place. The voice spoke. Not loudly. But with a weight that crushed everything else into silence. One word. Ancient. Heavy. Unmistakable. Again. Ethan's blood ran cold. Because he understood it. Not the language. Not how it was formed. But the meaning. Clear as his own thoughts. Lucas shook his head slowly, panic creeping into his voice. No, that's not. The ground pulsed again. Thump. Faster now. Sharper. More urgent. Ethan's chest tightened. It's speeding up. Another pulse. Closer together. The rhythm was changing again. Not slow. Not waking. Building. The mountain began to breathe faster. Shorter inhales. Violent exhales. Each one sending ripples through the valley, shaking bending the trees, tearing at anything not anchored down. This isn't just breathing, Ethan said, backing away slowly. It's preparing. Lucas grabbed his arm. Preparing for what? Ethan looked at the mountain. At the widening breach. At the eye that no longer blinked. And at the massive shape shifting behind it, pressing closer, pushing harder against the fractured stone. His voice barely came out. To get out. Another pulse slammed through the valley. Stronger than all the others. And this time, something inside the mountain pushed back. Hard.